Have you ever wondered who invented hell? Billions of people throughout history have believed in a place where the wicked are punished after death, a realm of fire, darkness, judgment, and eternal consequences. But here's the question almost nobody asks. What if hell wasn't created by a single religion? What if its story began thousands of years before Christianity, before Islam, and even before much of the Hebrew Bible was written? Imagine standing in one of the world's oldest cities nearly 5,000 years ago. The streets are crowded with merchants, priests chant inside towering temples, scribes carefully press symbols into wet clay. Around you rises one of humanity's first great civilizations, Sumer. Here, people were already asking the same questions we ask today. What happens when we die? Where do we go? Is there justice after death? Their answers would become some of the oldest surviving descriptions of the afterlife ever discovered, but they might surprise you. Because the earliest underworld was not a kingdom of flames. It was something far stranger. A silent land beneath the earth, a place where kings and beggars became equals, where even the gods rarely wished to enter. Over the next several thousand years, this mysterious underworld would slowly transform. Empires rose and fell, religions spread across continents, ideas mixed, evolved, and were reinterpreted. The dark realm imagined by the Sumerians gradually changed into the concepts of Sheol, Hades, Gehenna, and eventually the hell recognized by millions today. This isn't the story of proving one religion right or wrong. It's the story of how one of humanity's most powerful ideas evolved across civilizations. Because hell, as we know it today, wasn't born in a single moment. It was shaped over thousands of years of human history. So, who invented hell? To answer that question, we have to travel back to where written history itself began. To understand where the idea of hell came from, we have to begin with the world's oldest known civilization, Sumer. More than 5,000 years ago, in the fertile lands between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, the Sumerians built some of humanity's first cities. They invented writing, developed mathematics, created some of the earliest legal systems, and they left behind something even more remarkable: the oldest surviving stories about life after death. Unlike many modern religions, the Sumerians did not divide the dead into the good and the bad. There was no paradise waiting for the righteous, no eternal fire prepared for the wicked. Instead, everyone went to the same place, a vast underground realm known in Sumerian texts as Kur, sometimes described simply as the land of no return. Imagine a world without sunlight, endless silence, dust covering everything, rivers that carried no life, a place where souls wandered forever, separated from the world of the living. In one ancient poem, the dead are described as feeding on dust and drinking muddy water. Even kings who had ruled mighty cities became nothing more than silent spirits. Death erased status, wealth, power. Everyone shared the same fate. The ruler of this shadowy world was Ereshkigal, the queen of the underworld. Unlike later images of hell ruled by a devil, Ereshkigal was not evil in the modern sense. She did not tempt humanity. She did not wage war against the gods. Her role was to govern the unavoidable destination of every mortal. One of the most famous Sumerian myths tells the story of Inanna, the goddess of love, beauty, and power. Determined to expand her authority, Inanna descended into the underworld itself. But entering Kur came with a price. At each of the 7 gates, she was forced to surrender one symbol of her power, her crown, her jewelry, her royal garments. By the time she reached Ereshkigal's throne, she stood completely vulnerable. And there, according to the myth, Inanna was judged, struck dead, and hung on a hook. Only through the intervention of the gods was she eventually restored to life. To modern audiences, this may sound like mythology, but for the Sumerians, these stories expressed something deeply human. Death was not seen as reward, nor as punishment. It was simply a universal destiny that no one, not even the gods, could ignore. And yet, as civilizations grew, so did their ideas. People began asking a new question. What if the dead shouldn't all share the same fate? What if justice continued after death? That single question would transform the underworld forever. The first civilization imagined an underworld where everyone arrived together. But the civilization that followed introduced a revolutionary idea. Perhaps your actions in life could determine your fate after death, and with that idea, the road toward hell truly began. Our next stop is ancient Egypt. By the time ancient Egypt emerged as one of the world's greatest civilizations, humanity's view of death had begun to change. The underworld was no longer just a destination, it had become a courtroom. For the Egyptians, death was not the end of a journey. It was the beginning of a trial. Deep within the sacred texts buried alongside pharaohs and nobles, we find one of history's most influential ideas. Your actions in life would be judged after death. According to Egyptian belief, every soul entered the Hall of Two Truths. There they stood before Osiris, the god of the dead. But Osiris did not judge alone. Around him stood 42 divine assessors, each representing a different moral principle. Then came the moment every Egyptian feared, the weighing of the heart. Your heart was believed to contain everything you had ever done, every lie, every act of kindness, every betrayal, every moment of compassion. It could not be hidden. It could not be rewritten. On one side of the scales rested your heart, on the other, the feather of Ma'at, the symbol of truth, justice, and cosmic order. If your heart remained light, balanced by a life lived in harmony, you could enter the blessed afterlife. But if it became heavy with wrongdoing, there was no second chance. Waiting beside the scales was one of the strangest creatures in ancient mythology, Amit. With the head of a crocodile, the body of a lion, and the hindquarters of a hippopotamus, if your heart failed the test, Amit devoured it completely. Your soul would cease to exist, not tortured forever, not burned for eternity, simply erased. For many Egyptians, this fate was more terrifying than endless punishment, because existence itself would come to an end. This was something entirely new. For the first time, morality determined what happened after death. The underworld had become a place of justice, but another civilization would take this idea even further. The ancient Greeks would transform the world of the dead into a realm divided by destiny, a place where heroes, ordinary souls, and the wicked no longer shared the same fate. If you've ever heard of Hades, you've already encountered one of the most influential visions of the afterlife in history. But despite popular culture, Hades was not hell, and Hades was not the devil. In Greek mythology, Hades was simply the ruler of the underworld. Like Ereshkigal before him, his role was to govern the realm of the dead, not to tempt humanity or wage war against the gods. Yet the Greek underworld introduced something revolutionary. It was no longer a single destination, it was divided. Most ordinary souls wandered the asphodel meadows, a quiet place where life and memory slowly faded. Heroes and the virtuous could reach the Elysian fields, a paradise reserved for those favoured by the gods, but those who committed extraordinary crimes faced a different fate. Deep below lay Tartarus, a prison so dark and so distant that even the gods feared its depths. Here punishment became personal, eternal, symbolic. King Sisyphus was condemned to push a massive boulder uphill forever, only to watch it roll back down each time he reached the top. Tantalus stood in water he could never drink, beneath fruit he could never reach. Every desire remained just beyond his grasp. These punishments were not random. They reflected the crimes each individual had committed. Justice after death had become deeply personal. The idea that suffering could fit the sin would echo through later traditions for centuries. By now, the pieces were coming together. The Sumerians imagined an underworld. The Egyptians introduced moral judgment. The Greeks created individualized punishment. But the story was still far from complete, because one small valley outside an ancient city would give the world one of its most recognizable words for eternal punishment, Gehenna. And from that point on, the idea of hell would never be the same. By the first millennium BCE, the ancient Near East had become a crossroads of civilizations. Empires rose and fell. Trade routes connected distant peoples, and ideas traveled alongside merchants and armies. Among the ancient Israelites, the earliest Hebrew texts describe the realm of the dead using a different word, Sheol. Unlike the fiery hell imagined by many today, Sheol was a shadowy place beneath the earth where the dead gathered. In many of the oldest biblical passages, Sheol is not presented as a place of reward or punishment. It is simply the destination of the dead, rich and poor, righteous and unrighteous alike. In that sense, it resembles other ancient concepts of the underworld more than the later idea of eternal torment. But history never stands still. Between the 6th and 2nd centuries BCE, the Jewish world experienced profound political and cultural change. The Babylonian exile, the Persian Empire, and later the spread of Greek culture after the conquests of Alexander the Great. During these centuries, Jewish thought increasingly explored questions about resurrection, final judgment, and the ultimate triumph of justice. Alongside these developments, another word began to appear, Gehenna. Originally, Gehenna referred to the valley of Hinnom, just outside ancient Jerusalem. In earlier periods, some biblical texts associate this valley with practices that later generations strongly condemned. Over time, Jewish teachers began using Gehenna as a powerful image of divine judgment. By the time of the Second Temple period, different Jewish groups held different beliefs about what Gehenna represented. Some saw it as a temporary place of purification. Others viewed it as the fate awaiting the persistently wicked. There was no single, universal interpretation. When Christianity emerged in the 1st century CE, these discussions were already part of the religious world in which Jesus and his earliest followers lived. In the New Testament, references translated into English as hell often come from different original words, such as Gehenna, Hades, or Tartarus, each carrying its own historical background. Over the following centuries, Christian theologians reflected deeply on these texts. As Christian doctrine developed, Ideas about judgment, separation from God, and eternal punishment became more clearly defined in many traditions. Centuries later, the Quran would describe Jahannam, presenting a vivid picture of divine judgment alongside God's mercy and justice. While the Quran shares the broader ancient concern with accountability after death, it presents Jahannam within its own theological framework and message. Across Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, the details differ. Yet each tradition asks the same enduring question: how should justice be fulfilled when human life comes to an end? From the silent underworld of Sumer, to the judgment halls of Egypt, to the divided afterlife of Greece, and finally, to the great monotheistic traditions. The idea of hell had changed dramatically. But one final question remains. If no single civilization invented hell, then what exactly did humanity create? When Christianity emerged in the 1st century CE, it inherited a world where ideas about the afterlife were already being debated. In the New Testament, several different words are translated into English as hell, but they do not all mean the same thing. Gehenna referred to a place associated with divine judgment. Hades described the realm of the dead. And Tartarus, mentioned only once, evoked the deepest prison of rebellious spiritual beings. Over the centuries, Christian thinkers reflected on these texts and developed more systematic teachings about the afterlife. Heaven came to represent eternal communion with God. Hell became understood in many Christian traditions as the final consequence of rejecting God's grace and remaining separated from Him. Artists, theologians, and writers later shaped the powerful images that many people recognize today: rivers of fire, eternal darkness, and final judgment. By the Middle Ages, these images had become deeply rooted in Western culture, influencing literature, art, and the collective imagination for centuries. 6 centuries after the birth of Christianity, the Quran presented its own vision of the afterlife. It describes Jahannam as a place of judgment for those who knowingly reject truth and persist in injustice, while also emphasizing God's mercy, wisdom, and perfect justice. Alongside Jahannam, the Quran describes Jannah, a place of peace, beauty, and eternal reward for the righteous. Throughout the Quran, scenes of reward and punishment are not presented merely to inspire fear, but to encourage moral responsibility, compassion, and accountability. Islamic scholars have discussed these passages for centuries, exploring questions about justice, mercy, repentance, and the ultimate destiny of human beings. While its descriptions are distinct, the Islamic understanding of the afterlife continues humanity's enduring search for answers to one universal question: what happens after death, and how should justice be fulfilled? So, who invented hell? After travelling across more than 5,000 years of history, the answer is both simpler and far more fascinating. No one did. No king stood before his people and declared, "Today we create hell." No single prophet, no single empire, no single civilization invented the idea all at once. Instead, humanity spent thousands of years asking the same question: what happens after we die? The Sumerians imagined a silent world beneath the earth. The Egyptians imagined a soul standing before judgment. The Greeks imagined rewards for heroes and punishments for tyrants. Jewish tradition explored Sheol and later reflected on Gehenna. Christianity developed its own teachings about judgment and eternal destiny. Islam described Jahannam within its own message of divine justice and mercy. Each civilization, each culture, each religion tried to answer a question that no living person could answer with certainty. Yet despite their differences, one remarkable pattern appears again and again. Human beings have always believed that our choices matter, that justice should exist, that good and evil should not end in the same way, perhaps. That is the true origin of hell, not simply as a place, but as an idea born from humanity's search for justice, meaning, responsibility, and hope that our actions are not forgotten when life comes to an end, whether viewed through history, through archaeology, or through faith. The story of hell reveals something profound about us. We build cities, we write laws, we create civilizations. But above all, we tell stories, stories that help us understand life, death, and everything beyond. Because civilizations rise, empires fall, languages disappear. But ideas have a way of surviving. Sometimes for thousands of years, and perhaps the greatest mystery is not who invented hell, but why nearly every civilization in one form or another felt the need to imagine it fade to black. Every civilization leaves behind more than ruins, it leaves behind ideas. If you enjoy exploring the origins of humanity's greatest mysteries, subscribe and join us on the next journey. Because the next question may change everything. Who invented heaven? Every belief has a beginning, every civilization leaves a trace, and every question brings us one step closer to understanding who we are. Until our next journey, stay curious.